This is K.M. Wyland, and you're listening to the 77th episode of the Wordplay Podcast. I'm a very linear person, so it's no surprise that I generally write my stories in a very linear fashion. I need to know that all the preceding scenes are doing their job before I can proceed to the next scene. The only time I write scenes out of order is when I realize I've left something out and need to go back and insert an important piece of information. But my work in progress, The Deepest Breath, is proving to be a bit of an anomaly. Now that I've finished my climax scenes, I'm going back to fill in some important subplots and backstory. So far it's been a lot of fun, since I'm no longer feeling the pressure of creating a strong story arc. Really, what I'm getting to do is go back and play around with characters, and no writer is ever going to complain about that. Internal and external conflict, the killer combination. The latest post in the video series on my blog demonstrates, using the 2003 film adaptation of Peter Pan, how to power-pack your story's finale by combining internal and external conflict. You can watch the video on my blog at wordplay-kmwyland, that's weiland.blogspot.com. New videos are posted every Wednesday. Meanwhile, enjoy this week's podcast, 9 Reasons to Let Your Story Ripen. Whenever we come up with a wonderful new story idea, it's tempting to immediately sit down at the keyboard and start bringing it to life on the page. But that's rarely the best way to turn that sparkling new idea into a worthwhile and enduring story. In his book, How to Write Science Fiction and Fantasy, Orson Scott Card admits, "Good stories don't come from trying to write a story the moment I think of the first idea. All the stories I was still proud of 6 months after writing them have come from ideas that ripened for many months, usually years, between the time I first thought of them and the time they were ready to put into a story. Like vine-ripened tomatoes, stories require the slow nourishment of sunlight and a warm, imaginative soil to grow into rosy, juicy maturity. Otherwise, they risk suffering from the blight of the following pitfalls. 1. Meandering plot. 2. Two-dimensional characters. 3. Shallow themes. 4. Underdeveloped, non-existent subplots. Or 5. Weak climax. Writing up sparkly new ideas is like falling in love at first sight and getting married the next day. You might live happily ever after, but chances are good that after a little more time has passed, you'll realize that you really don't know this story so well at all. In fact, at times, it will feel like a total stranger, and you'll begin wondering what in tarnation you've gotten yourself into. It takes time and breathing space for us to figure out which ideas are worth committing to for the long haul. I've fallen in love at first sight with many ideas that eventually proved they didn't have the depth or staying power to support a long-term relationship. Stories aren't the only victims when we pull them off the vine before they're ripened. We suffer as well by 1. Losing our passion for a story, 2. Realizing we've wasted our time, and 3. Developing the habit of skipping from one new idea to the next without ever finishing a draft. As a caveat, let me throw out the fact that, for some authors, the only way to ripen a story is to fool around with it on paper. For me, putting a story on paper, even in the roughest of outlines, risks ruining the heady organic ebb and flow of my imagination. I prefer to leave my ideas in the greenhouse of my subconscious, pulling them out and pruning them from time to time, until I feel they're ready. Margaret Atwood once said that, "You may be wrong about being ready, but you're rarely wrong about not being ready." However, if this feels all wrong to you on a gut level, don't be afraid of acknowledging that your initial ramblings on paper may indeed constitute a ripening period of your own. Orson Scott Card again. For some writers, one of the best ways to help an idea ripen is to try writing a draft of it, seeing what comes up when you actually try to make it into a story. As long as you recognize that the draft you write immediately after thinking of the idea will almost certainly have to be thrown away and rewritten from the beginning, you'll be fine. Either way, don't be in a hurry to write down that brand new idea. Let it ripen, and you may be surprised at the full, mature flavor you're able to reap a year or so into the growing season. Thank you for listening to the Wordplay Podcast. To read a transcript of this episode, visit me on the web at wordplay-kmwyland, that's weiland.blogspot.com, and be sure to listen again next week.